Daryl, back in 2009, you were a top terror analyst at the Department of Homeland Security, and you put together a report titled Right-Wing Extremism, Current Economic and Political Climate Fueling Resurgence in Radicalization and Recruitment, in which you wrote, the DHS Office of Intelligence and Analysis has no specific information that domestic right-wing terrorists are currently planning acts of violence, but right-wing extremists may be gaining new recruits by playing on their fears about several emergent issues. The economic downturn and the election of the first African-American president present unique drivers for right-wing radicalization and recruitment. Now, that report caused quite a stir, and you stepped down. With this shooting, with the Kansas City shooting in April, with the Wisconsin shooting at the Sikh temple, are you feeling unfortunately vindicated in some way?
I don't look at it as a vindication. I just look at it as, good analysis and trying to provide some sort of indication and warning. It's a sad fact. I mean, we've had, just this year alone, I've counted up to 9 domestic non-Islamic terrorist attacks or plots that have occurred, and yet nobody seems to be connecting the dots here in Washington and providing any type of warning to the public or to those communities that are affected.
Why do you think, Daryl, there is such a fear for people to talk about right-wing extremism in America?
I think you brought up a really good point about how when these attacks occur, people tend to downplay them either because they misunderstand what's actually truly happening, or there may be people who are doing it deliberately because they don't want to draw any kind of, political stigma to the word domestic terrorism. But when you have ideologies that further people to radicalize and mobilize to commit criminal acts and violence, that meets the definition of terrorism, and we need to be calling it out. The media needs to be calling it out. The Department of Justice needs to say that this is an act of domestic terrorism. It's not just a crazed gunman who's gone in and shot a couple of cops. There's actually a belief system that motivated these people to do it.
Absolutely. I think it's wild to me that the Boston Marathon bombings happen. It's 2 19, 22-year-old kids that are following an ideology. They're lone here. They drop some homemade bombs, and they're immediately referred to as terrorists. It's immediately referred to as a terror attack. It is memorialized as a massive terror attack. I'm not trying to take anything away from it or trivialize it, but then you have incidents like this where you have lone wolf shooters going into Sikh temples, going into Jewish prayer centers and just firing off at will, trying to kill as many people as possible in the same capacity that the Boston Marathon bombers were trying to kill as many people as possible. But we have this hesitation, this lack of willingness to label this as a terrorist act. And I'm wondering if it has something to do with how we view the other rather than viewing ourselves, and because right-wing terror seems to come from within rather than from somewhere else, we have a bit of a fear of referring to it as terrorism, if that terrorism means something else to our country at this point.
You brought up good examples of how people have misused the word terrorism when, people are actually practicing their First Amendment rights. There have been other times where people just don't understand this is terrorism. So it's something that people need to be educated on and look at the motivations behind these criminal acts. And I think a lot of times, because the body counts don't rise to the level of a mass casualty-producing attack, people dismiss it as not being terrorism. Terrorism has nothing to do with the body count. It has to do with the political motivation to try to influence policy or to change society.
Now, Daryl, you are a conservative Republican Mormon, and you wrote this, you worked on this study in 2009. You were then essentially taken down, heavily criticized by conservatives, saying that this study was in an effort it was waging Obama's war on conservatives. Take me back there. Talk to me about that incident.
Yeah, I think a lot of critics had the wrongful assumption that a liberal left-leaning person wrote the report because it, talked about right-wing extremists. I think, many of these critics were quite shocked when I came out publicly a year later to talk about it and to reveal what my background is.